Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is Jared at 3C's Recreation, and today I'm going to show you how to change the valves on a Beta 4-stroke motorcycle. Pretty much from 2012 to current, these are all going to be the same process, different plastics, so you'll have to figure out how to take your side shrouds off if it's older than 2020. But this is one of our team bikes. It has close to 100 hours on it, so it's definitely time to check them. We're going to head south in a couple days, so we want to make sure before we make that trip, the bike's ready to go. I don't know if we're gonna have to change the valves, Shims, but we can at least get in there and check them. I'll show you guys how to get to that point. And if we actually have to change them, then we'll show you the rest of it. So first, I'll show you guys the tools that we're gonna use. Ultra gray, so whenever we're putting the valve cover back on, got some 10 millimeters, an 8 millimeter. You're gonna wanna have a couple of these because on the top of the valve cover, there's always gonna be like a tamper-proof screw, and you're gonna have to get that out. Next, we've got the set of feeler gauges, and then you have a couple different 5 millimeter hex heads. I have a shorter one, and I'll show you why. You're going to need it to get underneath the frame on one of the bolts. An 8 millimeter Allen key, and then a 19. We're only going to use these if we actually have to change the valves or the shims. So there's that, and then we have our micrometer. Again, only if I have to go that far, and then the shims themselves. And luckily enough for me, I'm a Beta dealer and I actually have a service manual. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the seat off, and we'll take the gas tank off. This bike does not have the dry wet map switch here, so I don't have to worry about that wire. And then we also do not have a display in this bike, so there is no low fuel gauge light. So the only things on my gas tank that I have to disconnect are going to be my fuel line, and then the power going to the fuel pump. So I'm going to start doing that now, and once I get these two items off, I'll stop it back down and show you guys what's next. Alright, so we just got the gas tank off. This is where my fuel line connected, and then this is where the power went for the fuel pump. So that's out of the way. The next step is to get the upper engine mount out of the way. So we've got two 10 millimeters on this side. And then the reason why we do this is we can't get the valve cover off without the engine mount being removed. It's just tight enough here that you can't sneak it out. So that's what we have to do. And then on this side, I also had to grab a 13 millimeter out of the toolbox because the lower mount on this side is a 13. And then once we have those out of the way, we'll take the spark plug out, and then that's when we can get to the valve cover. And this is that tamper-proof screw. It's right there. Some guys replace these. We have them in stock, so if you don't want to put this back in there and just use a standard 5 millimeter Allen key, you can. And I had mentioned earlier that I always have a shorter 5 millimeter Allen key when I'm doing this. Then that's for this back right one. It's with this wire harness in the way, but you can't physically really get in there with the taller one. You're gonna want this lower one smaller. That way it'll sit on there correctly, and that way you're not gonna strip out the screw, because if that's stripped out, you're not having a good day. So what we'll do now is we'll get that undone, and then we'll show you inside there. All right, so now we got the upper engine mount out of the way, the spark plug cap is out of the way, and we took these 4 bolts out as well. So now we're ready to take the valve cover off the engine. So pretty much all you have to do is kind of rock it back and forth, break it free, and then it's going to pick right up and off, and you're going to want to come out this side. And this is where that ultra gray is going to come in handy. When we go to put this back together, we're going to smear the ultra gray in these pockets. And you can kind of see on here from the previous time I had it apart, the ultra gray. So I'll take a minute and I'll clean all this out, which will be nice. So what we got to do now is get this machine to top dead center. We're done taking stuff apart. To do that, we have to line the lines of the cams up with the top of the cylinder head, and it has to also be in compression stroke at the same time. So we're going to need the cam lobes, which is what we're going to be checking. The exhaust cam lobe is going to be pointed up and out, and the intake cam lobe is going to be pointed up and out. So the next step is to get top dead center, and then we can use our feeler gauges, get in there, and we'll check these. So you can kind of watch. I'll get this at top dead center, and then we'll get the feeler gauges out. All right, so I cleaned the ultra gray out of the cylinder head, and now we got to get this to top dead center. We need to get these lines on the cam down to be flush with the top of the cylinder head here, and that'll also rotate the cam lobes. So I usually like to click the bike up into gear, and then I just give it a little small tugs, and we are really close right there. So that's top dead center, and we know that because both of our cam lobes are facing up and away. They're not touching the top of the tappets that are pushing on the valve. So right now we're at top dead center, and we can take our feeler gauges, which are sitting up here. And this bike, and this has been true since we've been a beta dealer in 2012, these are our values that we're looking for. So lower end, upper end, let's stick these in there and we'll see what we have. So it's easy to start with the exhaust because it's on this side. And I'm going to start with the lower end because you always want to see what you can get in there. So this is a 0.127, and you kind of slide it. Okay, perfect. So the exhaust on this side's good. I know I could fit one more feeler gauge higher here, so we're good on this side on the exhaust anyway. So that one's in good shape. The next one we'll check because we're on this side of the bike is we'll check this intake. And the lower end on this one is a 0.1, and that's what we have here. It's hard to see. And so I kind of come right through here, and one hand with the GoPro makes it a little more difficult. And we're gonna slide right through there. Okay, so this one's kind of cool. Okay, so it's not liking it, so I'll be able to show you guys the rest of this process. So we're gonna go one size smaller to see if that fits in. So let's just grab that one here. All right, so now we'll take this, angle it just a little bit like that off center. And okay, that one, it's hard to tell for you guys, but it's going in. So this side, we are the intake, and this is always the one that has, in my experience, this is always the one that has to be adjusted the most. So now we'll go to the other side of the bike, and we'll do the other two on this side. So here's the exhaust over here. Let me turn this around. It's easier to hold. And you kind of come in from this angle. Again, this one fits really easy. I'm not worried about that. I can easily fit one more size feeler gauge up in there. And we're gonna go right to the smaller because these usually need to be adjusted together. So we're going to go to the lower one because I'm pretty sure it's going to need it. So let's fit this in there. Just trying to get it lined up just right. Okay. So yeah, it's fitting under there. Kind of like I expected though. It needs to be adjusted. So there we go, now that it's in there. So both of the intakes are gonna have to be adjusted. So the next step for us is we're gonna have to loosen the cam chain. And there's a cam chain tensioner right down here. That's what this bigger 8mm was used. And then this is that 19mm socket. So we need to get the tension off the chain so then we can loosen the cam bridge and get these 7 bolts out holding the top of the cam out. Then we can pop this cam out. So that's what we'll do next. So before I take any of this apart, I always want to make sure that I know exactly what tooth the chain sits on. So what I usually do is I take some starting fluid, spray it on a rag, and I clean it. That way my marker will stick to it without having to worry. And I'll mark 2 in a row just because I like to have extra. And do the same over on this side. This we're not going to actually take off because the exhaust is good, but I still like to mark it. You never know. Maybe it jumps. So that's marked, and then, or that's cleaned, and then now I'm just going to mark it. There's 1, and there's 2. And then on this side as well, we'll do 1 and 2. That way when I take this off, I know exactly how to lay it back on. I don't have to worry about the timing jumping out. So I'm going to go back to just taking the rest of these 7 bolts out. Okay, the 7 bolts are out. I'll just take the last one out because this has the cover on it for the cam chain. Oh, keep in mind that these are different lengths. So the 3 on my side of the bike are longer, and then the 4 on the other side. So it's kind of cool. There's not the same amount on both sides. You can kind of know that. So shorter ones go on the other side of the bike, longer ones are on our side. So now we'll come back over here. Everything's loose enough, so now all I have to do is I'll pull up on the cam just a little bit to get the bridge. Now that I've pulled that up, I can get this bridge off here. The oil kind of holds it down. So the bridge is up, and I'll set this over here with the bolts. And also, it's the next step is just taking the cam out. So all I do is I pick up on the cam, and I push this bearing back. I'm gonna show you guys. I push it back that way, and then it lets the cam sit down in there, and I can roll this chain off this side of it, and then now I can get this up and out. So now our cam is out of the way. We'll just set that with the rest of that stuff over there. And this little pocket is where our shims are underneath of here. That's ultimately what we're trying to get to is both of these intakes. So what I'll do next is I'm going to get these shims out, and I just have a little, I'll show you guys what I use. I use this little magnet. Typically I have 2 hands again. So hold it up out of the way, and then this magnet just pops them out. So now it's important to keep track of of these. So each side is going to be different, and the numbers are probably worn off at this point. So that's where the micrometer is going to help me. So what I'll do next is I'm going to get the right size shim. I'm going to do both of these. I'm just going to pull this one out. I'm going to measure it. I'm going to go down 2 shim sizes, and I'll put it back in, and then I'll do the same on that side. I'll measure it, and I'll go down 2 shim sizes. So I'll do that now, and we'll come back to it. So I'll show you guys one of these. I just took the right intake one out. I just fixed the left intake, and so we're going to zero this out, and we'll put this in there. This is a 2.56, pretty much a 2.55. So we're going to go down to a 2.45. So I'm going to grab one of those real quick. And this one I just pulled out of the bin. It comes up to a 2.47, which makes sense because the other one was actually a 2.57. So we're going to use this one. We'll stick this in there and put it all back together, and we'll check it again. Okay, so both of the new shims are in there, and I'm going to set this cam back in here. It's important that this bearing rides all the way over and against this little nub in the back side of the head here. So I'm going to pull you up and show you where you can see where the oil is sitting. This bearing, just so you know, has to be pushed all the way against that when you set this down in there. So I kind of push it past like I showed you earlier to allow the cam chain to come up and under. And we got to go a long ways. We'll keep turning it here. Kind of where my marker comes in handy. Let's see how close we are here. We're off by a couple. And right there. And then now I have to pull this bearing back up onto the cam. And I'm going to set it down, and I got to make sure it's pushing against that little cutout that I was showing you guys. I always do it 3 times because I want to make sure it's right. Okay, so that's back in. I'm going to put the bridge back in, and we're going to torque these. So the first round of torque is going to be 5 newton meters and then 10 newton meters. So I'm going to put this in, I'll put all the bolts in, and then I'll come back to it. Okay, so we got all 7 bolts tight on the top, and what we want to do in our chain is perfect. It's right where it needs to be. I'm going to put my finger in here where the chain tensioner would normally go, and I'm going to push, and you can see how that tightened that up just to make sure we're perfect across the top there. And so now we're just going to grab right in the middle of the road. This is a 0.152, and that fits exactly where it can be. So now all I have to do is kind of snake this back down through here and Perfect, slides right in like we want it to. So now the intake is good here. You know, run to the other side of the bike here. And we'll slide it in this side. Yeah, and it's going under just fine. So, bad angle of course, but you can see it's in there like it should be. So we're good. So all 7 of these are tight, and all I gotta do is we'll put the cap back on. We'll put the spark plug wire back on the bike as well. We'll put the engine mount back on, gas tank, seat, and then we'll start this thing to make sure it's all good to go. So the first thing we're gonna do is we have to reset our cam chain tensioner. And so I'm gonna use my 19 here. I'm gonna slide this out first, let it sit there. And because I need to get the end of this out screwed out of the cap. So I'm gonna hold this on there. I'm just gonna unscrew it out. Sometimes they get stuck pretty good. I'm gonna unscrew this because we have to refeed our tensioner back through the back side of this. So I'll get the wrench out of the way so you guys can see what I'm doing. All right, so this is unscrewed. I'm gonna, let's see, this is actually longer than I want it to be. I'm gonna set this down over here, and then I'm gonna grab this, and we wanna push this through. It's got a clip in there, and it's only gonna let it go one way, so that's why it can't come back out this way. So that's why I have to take our cap off. I'm gonna push it in with a spring, and I'm gonna push it in just so it's roughly flat. It might be too far actually, so I'll push it all the way back through. And like I said, we want to stop it when it's pretty much flat. Okay, last time, 3rd time's a charm. So perfect, right there, we'll stop it. And we're gonna install this first, and then after that, we're gonna install the spring with the cap. So this is what's gonna push in. And you always wanna make sure that after you install this, the slop in here is gone. So this is kind of like your way of checking if this all goes together and this still has slop, something didn't go right, this didn't push out at the end. You should hear a click. Whenever you push this spring in, all of a sudden it should let it go clink all the way out and put tension against the plastic guide inside here. So that's what I'll do next. So now you can see that it's got all the tension it needs. It did its job, it pushed out, and now it's super tight. So put the cap on, upper engine mount, gas tank, seat, should be good to go. Okay, so we've got everything back together, fuel's hooked up, gas tank's on, seat's on, everything's ready to go. So let's give it an initial start and see how she sounds. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. We're a beta dealer. We'd love to work with you. Again, we're 3Cs Recreation. If you have any questions, give us a call.